So now we transition a little bit in the course and we turn our attention away from some of the specific corporate strategies and we look more toward execution. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today, you're going to see evidenced in how you run your BSG simulation team. Much of what we do for the rest of the course, though, you're not going to see that as much because the computer is very faithful. Beyond your interaction of you and your teammate, the computer does exactly what you tell it to, and that's not exactly what a real organization does. So we're going to cover basically two categories of topics today. The first category is how we're going to set the foundation for strategic leadership and this idea of control mechanisms and the types of control mechanisms. And then we're also going to look at some of the specific issue of how do other stakeholders control you, the CEO of the company. One thing where I don't think the textbook covers itself with glory is the way it depicts strategic management as in the past it was very linear and easy and straightforward, and now it's very circular and repetitive and reiterative and the like. I don't think it's ever been the way they cast it in the previous sense, but nonetheless, I think this idea of that strategy is a very dynamic thing is always good to focus on. I really like their issue of where they raise informational control. And I have to tell you right now, many of you are in the very midst of these challenge as you go through your BSG team. And so you're asking yourself, we started off with this in mind. And now as we get more experience with our company and as we have a better understanding of our competitors, does this still work? We may be making a lot of mistakes in the beginning, and now have we learned from them, or are we making better decisions? Does that mean that we should go into a different direction? And I'm going to be so bold as to say what often is separating the top performing teams and the bottom performing teams is how well you're handling the information that you're being presented. In other words, are you really getting are you really gleaning the key data from your footwear industry report, competitive intelligence report, and your company operating reports, such that you really have accurate questions to how are you doing and why are you doing, such that you come up with good ideas as to why you're doing better. You see on the slide some aspects of what makes for good informational control, but I want to emphasize that this is a very dynamic process, even in real companies. For example, early on in Walmart's history, Sam Walton developed a practice of periodically, and I think it's every other week, but I'm not sure of its frequency, where every Saturday morning the key management team from Walmart comes in and they look at a specific set of metrics week after week after week after week to get an understanding for how the business is performing, and I'm sure they adapt that information over time. You see in many companies, in Amazon, it's Monday mornings, in some companies it's Friday afternoons, but they have a tendency to get together with the senior management team to look at this information and get a sense of, are we asking the right questions? What are the trends showing? What should we be doing differently? And then you see that boxed in slide that says, what is it that you're doing that keeps you awake at night? In a few classes, we're going to watch some videos from a former CEO of Xerox, Anne Mulcahy, and in those videos, she candidly admits that she lay awake many nights wondering whether what she was doing with the company was correct. Our textbook talks about the triad of behavioral control, and this is how, in general terms, companies exert leadership. And we're going to have a specific chapter later on about strategic leadership, but I think this is some very useful stuff. And in that triad of behavioral controls, they talk about boundaries, which is really another word for rules, culture, and reward systems. And I think those are very useful ways to say, how is a leadership team trying to influence its organization to get it to do what they want it to do? Some key things to keep in mind is culture is a nonstop process, and we'll talk more about culture later. But also in the rewards, you can do a tremendous amount of damage if your rewards are seen as unfair and inequitable. And so working very hard on that is going to be a time-consuming process. It's easy to say we love culture and we always want to rely on our culture because culture is a very mature thing. And that's true. Probably the most effective long-term way, if you can afford to do it, is have a very strong culture. But there are some reasons why that's not easy or maybe not even tenable in all organizations. Why isn't it easy? It takes time to establish a good culture. It takes a lot of effort to establish a good culture. Frankly, a lot of companies have poor cultures. And finally, you have to have a workforce that's relatively stable, such that a culture can take root and can be effectively implemented. If I'm, for example, running a company where we rely on relatively inexpensive entry-level workers, for example, a lot of fast food chains, can I afford for culture to rely on these sets of workers where I may only have them for 6 months to a year? It becomes difficult, but we all love culture. Rules seem like the antithesis of culture. This is, instead of counting on people to do the right thing, now I'm going to tell them what to do. But I want to emphasize that there are some good byproducts that come with being very standardized. Consistent output is a great outgrowth of that. When things are more routine, this allows you to take your best practices and put them into practice and implement them system-wide. So the rules do work. What's the downside to rules? People don't like to be told what they can and can't do. And then you have a reward system. And the trick here is to make sure that your reward system enhances your culture and does not undercut your culture. And so I want you to see these three elements of the triad not as standalone or are they good or bad, but they interact. And let me give you an example of this from an example where I know a lot of people are in the middle of it, and that's the airlines, flying for the airlines. One of the companies that's lauded as having the very best culture is Southwest Airlines, and I can tell you, they get a lot of kudos for good reasons. They really do have things like, if the airplane's running late and the bags are getting out late, my friends that are the pilots have said, yep, they really will go down to the ramp and sling bags into the belly of the airplane to try to get the airplane out on time. Now you contrast that with some of the other older airlines that are heavily unionized, although Southwest is unionized too. And that guy down the ramp is likely to tell that pilot, you get your little fanny back up those stairs in that airplane because this is my job and you're not going to take my job away from me. But I'll give you an example of how culture and rewards can be a little bit challenging sometimes. When I had a friend that first went to Southwest Airlines, went to work for Southwest Airlines, the very bottom of the pecking order is called sitting reserve. Here you don't even have a line number. You don't even have a trip schedule. You're just told you are on call these days of the month because if we have a pilot that gets sick, we're going to throw you at this problem and put you into the system. And so a buddy of mine got hired for Southwest, and the very first year he was hired for Southwest, he was still sitting reserve, and his reserve days sat exactly on Thanksgiving and exactly on Christmas. And it was a weird shift bid where both of those days he knew what his shift was going to be on both of those days. And he said, yep, I'm on reserve for both Thanksgiving and Christmas Day. And I said, wow, I guess you're guaranteed you're going to work those days. He said, actually not. He said, those are probably the last two holidays I'll have with my family for many, many years, because Southwest has a real strong culture against people calling in sick when they're not and ditching their trips over the holidays and making the guys that are sitting reserve fly those trips, to the point where if they might actually call in sick because they're not feeling too perfect over the holidays, they probably won't, because they don't want to be that guy that called in and stuck the buddy on reserve. So they have this enormously strong culture that says you don't stick it to your coworkers, and that's really positive. And then he said, of course, the other reason that I'm likely not to get called is because on those particular holidays you get paid a pay bump, like 1.3 times your normal pay for working on those holidays. So a lot of guys are motivated to work them just because it's going to bring in more money. So we're going to talk more about this in the next video. Stick with me.